Hello, my friends, hello, and welcome once again to Stately Vaughan Manor. So today, we're going to be talking about Star Trek, The Next Generation, because this is Book Trek 2021. I'm finally doing another Book Trek 2021 video. It's been a while, but here it is. And this month we're talking about Star Trek, The Next Generation. That is the series that we're focusing on this month. And that is one of my favorite Star Trek series. It's actually right behind the original series in my estimation. Loved that show. I have to admit that I did. I didn't start out loving it though. I remember distinctly when I first watched Star Trek The Next Generation, the premiere encounter at Farpoint. It was a little disappointing, the premiere. Kind of sucked actually, to tell the absolute truth. There were a lot of things I felt didn't work in that premiere. And of course I was comparing it the whole way with the original series, because how could I not? We were all very excited to get The Next Generation. But we were, those of us who loved Star Trek, but we were a little fearful too. We didn't want them to mess up Star Trek, and it kind of seemed like they were messing up Star Trek. The first couple years of Star Trek The Next Generation were a little rough. Actually, the first season especially was really rough. It was not great. Most of the episodes in the first season. I mean, I kept watching, of course. I was a loyal viewer, no matter how much it sucked, which it occasionally did, maybe more than occasionally. But you have to remember how bad television was in the 80s. I mean, it was bad. 80s TV, yeah, it blew, 80s TV. It was no good, for the most part. So, this was probably the best thing, and it kind of sucked, especially next to the original Star Trek. But there were things about it, like when Encounter at Farpoint first came on, when the show first came on, and they had Wesley Crusher as the teenage sidekick, I knew I was really worried. I hate teenage sidekicks. So when Wesley Crusher came on with his ridiculous sweater, I knew we were in trouble. At least I thought that we were. Captain Picard was unlikable in the first season. He was just grumpy. Deanna Troi had that ridiculous outfit. There were a lot of things wrong. And as I was watching, I realized in that first season that actually the best character on that show was Wesley Crusher. And that's sad. I mean, Wesley Crusher in the first season of Star Trek, I believe, and I think I'm right on this, I think he saved the ship pretty much by himself at least 6 times in the first season. I think it was every 4 episodes Wesley Crusher saved the ship. He saved the Enterprise. And no one would listen to this kid. Like, Picard was like, shut up, Wesley. I mean, but Wesley was pretty much the guy that was saving everybody, like always. And I couldn't help but think, Captain Kirk never needed a 16-year-old kid to save his ship. Yeah, so things were rough. Things were rough in that first season. Yeah, it was. But it did get better. By the 3rd season, it was actually pretty good. I was actually watching because the show was really good by that point. And of course, I ended up loving all of the characters. I have my favorites, but I ended up loving them all. And by the time the show aired its finale, I loved that show more than any other show that had aired in my lifetime, I think. I probably still feel that way about it. I think I love The Next Generation more than any other television show that's aired in my lifetime that I could think of. That show improved drastically, and it was great. I love Star Trek The Next Generation. I have a lot of good memories of that show. A lot of them. But I haven't actually rewatched too much of The Next Generation. I remember when it went off the air, it was sad, but I just thought at the time, they're just going to be making movies with these guys forever. And they didn't. Star Trek actually vanished for a while after Enterprise. I actually liked Enterprise too. I liked all the shows up through Enterprise. But there was a period after Enterprise where there was just no Star Trek for years and years and years, and that sucks. Of course, we got Star Trek back now, in a way, but it's certainly not the Star Trek that we used to have. And I don't think I'm being too much of an old fogey when I say that. And I don't even hate the new show, Discovery. I don't hate it. I just don't think it's as good as the other shows. Not even close, really. But we are talking about the Next Generation. There are a couple things that I'm doing for the Next Generation. First of all, I'm reading this book. Actually, I read this book. This book is the first novel of the Star Trek The Next Generation novel series. They did a novelization of Encounter at Farpoint. I think Steve Donoghue did a video of that where he just spent a lot of time grumping about all the things he didn't like about The Next Generation and saying a bunch of inaccurate things about it. But yeah, he read that book. So if you're interested, he has a review of Encounter at Farpoint. But this was the first original novel. This is a novel written by Diane Carey, who had written a ton of other Star Trek novels. I think even today she is known mostly for her Star Trek novels that she wrote. I believe Steve Donoghue, in I think his Star Trek Starter Kit video, mentioned, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I could be wrong, but I believe he said that Diane Carey was one of the best Star Trek writers. And if that's true, we're in trouble, guys, because this book has some problems. Not everything was bad in this book, but it does have some problems, which I'll detail in a moment. So this is the first thing I'm doing or have done. But I'm also going to talk about comics, because I've decided to do comics also for Star Trek, for Book Trek 2021. First one I'm going to be talking about, or reading, I haven't read it yet, is The Best of Star Trek The Next Generation. This was DC Comics when they had the license to Star Trek The Next Generation. And I believe that this is 1991. So the show was still on when these comics were made. So it'll be interesting to read them. I remember liking them. I read the Star Trek comics as they came out, and looking through it, it actually looks pretty good. It's got Pablo Marcos, for one thing, as the artist. And Pablo Marcos is a really, really good artist. So I like him a lot. So that's cool. So I'm looking forward to reading that. But I also got this in the mail. This is IDW's Star Trek The Next Generation. This is their omnibus. It has a bunch of their Star Trek series. Now, these were all made long after the show ended its run. So it'll be interesting to read this as well. But for right now, all I got to talk about is Ghost Ship, the first Star Trek novel. Now, in the beginning of this novel, there's a Soviet battleship that is destroyed or seemingly destroyed by an alien force in 1995. Yes, a Soviet battleship that was destroyed in 1995. You see, there's a problem when you're a science fiction writer and you're writing about the near future, because this was written in the late 80s, 88 I think was when this was written. And of course they just assumed, but you got to be careful when you just assume things about the near future. And even, I guess, it doesn't really matter too much, I guess, because Diane Carey probably figured nobody would be reading this in a few years anyway. But yeah, so that was the first interesting thing. And then it gets to our Star Trek characters. Now, the plot of this novel is, it fits right in with the first season of Star Trek The Next Generation when this was written. This was written early in the first season. Probably only the first episode, Encounter at Farpoint, had been filmed. Probably. I could be wrong, but probably. And the plot of this is about as good as you would get in an average to below average episode of Star Trek The Next Generation's first season, and that's really saying something. The plot is not great. So the plot is not one of the strengths of this book. This book does have some strengths. The plot is not one of them. It's just kind of, I feel like, it's a book. You have an unlimited budget. You can do anything in a book, and even the special effects seem bad in this book. And that shouldn't be the case, With the way things are described, it all seems like a low-budget episode of Star Trek The Next Generation. Like a filler episode, Not even a good one. So there's that. As far as the writing goes, it's serviceable. It's okay. She does commit, Diane Carey, some terrible crimes against writing in general. She has a couple moments, I can't remember exactly, but there were a couple moments along the lines of, like at one point, she said something along the lines of, Captain Picard's words put ice water around all their feet, speaking about the people he was talking to. His words put ice water around their feet. That's terrible. You shouldn't do that. Don't do that, Diane Carey. And in another point, when Captain Picard was looking at somebody, it was described as, how was it? His glare was like molasses or something like that. And that's just stupid. There's stuff like that. I mean, just crimes against the English language and narrative in general. So if she is one of the better Star Trek writers, we're in trouble because this is not great. It's not bad. Most of the writing is, like I said, is pretty serviceable, but there's stuff like that all throughout here. And it's just like, The good thing about this the character stuff in here is actually pretty good, which surprised me, considering how early this was in the series. Now, the characters don't always act like they end up acting in the show, but it points out in this book how all of these crew members barely know each other because they just started the voyage. So this must happen pretty much immediately after Encounter at Farpoint, or really close to it, because Riker, you see things from his point of view through parts of the book, and he doesn't know Picard at all. He's having a hard time relating to Picard because he just doesn't know him. They don't know each other. And he's stuck with this guy, working with this guy. And he's had this relationship in the past with Deanna Troi, but nobody else on the ship knows about it. They're the only people that know. And he doesn't know anybody really well. Riker doesn't really like Data or understand Data. He views Data as just a machine. Whereas Geordi, in the book, views Data as a living being who's his friend. So they both view Data in completely different ways, which is interesting because that definitely changes. I don't remember on the show, it's been a while since I've seen anything from the first season, but I don't remember Riker really acting like that. The way he acts in this book towards Data, he's a bit of an ass, actually. It also goes on about how insecure Riker is and how he's always overcompensating. And I always got that feeling about Riker, so that seems like a keen observation. He's always very shouty and he's prancing around on the bridge, trying to make himself look important. What? I'm sorry. Rhonda is a big fan of Riker. You a big fan of Riker? She's a big fan of Riker. Sorry. Anyway. So yeah, I always get the feeling that Riker was overcompensating. Yes, are you going to let me continue now? Or are you just going to sit there and growl for no reason? She's going to growl for no reason. Hold on. Hey, will you be good? I'm trying to talk about Star Trek. So be good, okay? No more noise. I've just got like a few more minutes, okay? So be good. I gotta trash Diane Carey some more. Oh yeah, Diane Carey. So a lot of the character work in this book is actually pretty interesting. It's interesting to get that inside view of the characters at the beginning of their voyage in Star Trek The Next Generation. So I liked all of that stuff. All of that stuff was interesting. Some of the characters you don't really get to know that well in this, but you do focus a lot on Geordi and Riker and Troy, and that's cool. Data, unfortunately, is pretty much used for comedy relief, as he so often is in the show. So Data doesn't come off that well. Wesley shows up just long enough to be annoying, you know, stuff like that. So, Ghost Ship, read it only if you feel you really have to. And I did, so I read it. And it wasn't like a terrible experience. There's good stuff in here. It's just, you know, overshadowed by a dull plot and mediocre writing. So there you go. Also, one thing that's interesting in here is that Diane Carey, who seems to know how military ships are run, points out how ridiculous some of the things going on as far as the bridge is concerned. She points out that Riker has nothing to do. Like, there's absolutely no point to Riker. I mean, Mr. Spock was a science officer, so he always had something to do, even though he was the first officer. Riker's just pretty much just stands around or sits around and tries to overcompensate and make himself look like he's indispensable. But really, what's he doing there? And she points that out in this book. Like, he's always like insecure because he realizes he ain't got nothing to do on this bridge. So that was kind of fun. And it points out that Diana Troy, as a counselor, nobody knows really what she's supposed to do. It's like she's the counselor, but it's a new position, apparently, and there's only a few of them, apparently, according to this. And no one really knows what she's supposed to do or what her real job is or what's going on with the counselor. That was kind of interesting. It was interesting to get Dan Carey's take on that. Somebody who knows how this stuff really works in the real world and how it probably would work on a starship. So that was fun. Gotta give her the props for that. You know, for that part at least. So yeah, so far on Book Trek 2021, Next Generation at least, this was no more interesting than its covers. I did mention the Star Trek covers, right? How it's always usually just like characters and a ship in the background and that's it. They do get worse before they get better. Eventually these just become photographs and it becomes like this awful Photoshop monstrosities that you get in your Star Trek covers. It's pretty fitting for this book. Anyway, I'm done complaining about it. But I'm hoping that I do better with these guys. So for the next couple I can't speak. I'm sorry, my bloopers are left in on my videos. For my next Book Trek video, I'll be talking about these guys, I'm hoping. And I'm hoping they'll be better than this mediocre first season novel. We'll see. All right, guys. Thanks for stopping by. Be sure to catch my top 10 favorite horror books tomorrow. That should be fun. Okay, guys. You guys have a great day.